Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Hudgens. I have read your discussion boards from week 2 and posted feedback in the discussion board rubric online. Make sure you take the time to go back in and read my feedback. I realize that many of you write your discussion boards in a Word document and copy and paste those documents, that content into the discussion board, and that sometimes that when you copy into the discussion board that the format gets a little wonky. Please know you've got one more discussion board in this course. I'm pretty consistent in how I grade the discussion boards. I'm looking for general APA formatting that's especially with the use of in-text citations and a reference list. If you copy and paste over into the discussion board and your lines are completely turned around and it's completely broken up, you need to clean up that format a little bit. But if the font changes a little bit, some words are bigger than others, that's just an artifact of copying and pasting. So I want you to be attentive to the appearance of your work in a discussion board, but know that I'm not going to be overly critical if it isn't exactly lined up and perfect. But there needs to be some intent to look APA-ish. From a content standpoint, you guys did a great job really looking at the ethical issue that was evolving in this scenario. What I found interesting was that the majority of you came to the conclusion that this issue between this nurse who was not doing what was being asked of her was really a result in a breakdown of communication. And I think that's such a great point. I think when we think about conversations and the importance of having those conversations, it's vital that when things are uncomfortable that we move through that discomfort and we still have those conversations. Your classmate, James, did a great job giving us some biblical context for this. He wrote that biblically speaking, our fears can be overcome by assuring ourselves that our actions are used for good. As according to Peter 3:13, if we suffer for what is right, is blessed as we can't back away from threats and be frightened. Therefore, never look back down or avoid conflict because it's uncomfortable. As it is also that if we are comfortable, we are not growing, and vice versa. What a great reminder that when we are uncomfortable, we are doing things that are often pretty good for us, especially if it's challenging us to face something that frightens us. And many of us do not like conflict. Many of us would really rather not have those difficult conversations. I think authors Carrie Patterson and James Greening and John McMillan and Al Switzer wrote a series of books. Their first was called Crucial Conversations, and it followed a few years later with Crucial Confrontations. And those 4 authors came together to really explore the importance of having difficult conversations and doing it in a way that you didn't harm the listener and you were able to get your point across effectively. And they used the business setting to explore those concepts. And if you have, once you're through graduate school and you've got your master's degree, take the time to buy these books and put them on your shelf and take your time to read them. Of the leadership books I have, those 2 books are probably the most flagged books I own because they have such nuggets of wisdom about how to handle difficult conversations, and then later Crucial Confrontations, which really talks about crucial, difficult interactions that go beyond just having a conversation. So I think those things were explored very well from really thinking about communication. Developmentally, I think the papers were really very well. The discussion boards were solid. A few things I want to caution you for. Anytime you post a reference list, whether it's in a discussion board or a paper, always go to your reference list and backward check that anything you have in your reference list was actually used. You can use the word feature that's the find. You can click on find and type in an author and make sure that you've used it in a paper. The other thing to do is make sure that if you've used it in a paper that you've properly referenced it. Failure to properly reference something you've cited or reference something you haven't cited is viewed by most writers as a form of plagiarism. As your teacher, I'm going to assume that it was just a misstep and that you've not properly audited your own reference list or your citations. But that's a learning curve that you want to be very careful with. So I want you to always look at your reference list and your citations and make sure that they match. The other thing that I want to caution you as you move forward in the course is there are times that I'm going to write to you that you have minor grammatical errors. At the graduate level, I'm not going to go through your papers and correct all your grammatical errors. I'm not going to point them out. The vast majority of grammatical errors are not done because you don't know how to write. Not everybody, but most. Most grammatical errors are really their typos or they're they are a minor grammatical mistake in where you think a comma should go. It could be that you're in a sentence, your verb and your subject don't agree. When I'm reading it, if there's not a consistent pattern, I'm going to assume that it's a one-off problem, and you're going to hear from me that there's minor grammatical errors. If you have a significant problem with your sentence structure, or if you have a difficult time using punctuation appropriately, I'm going to be very specific about that and point you to an example of that. So if you see minor grammatical errors, assume that you had nothing consistent and they were one-offs. Some of them could be typos. Some of them could be just minor issues that you've just made because you're not a doctorally prepared writer. For me, it's not worth getting tangled up in correcting all of the little errors because they're not done without true educational knowledge. It's just not worth your effort or mine. Next week, you're going to be writing a paper for your strategic planning paper. Make sure I'm telling you the right thing. It's been a very long day. Yes, I have the right assignment. I'm sorry. It is the strategic planning. It's a literature review. So this should appear to have a scholarly effort. There's a reason it's worth 125 points. What I want to caution you is as you go through your literature review, you should be using a large majority of articles that are published in peer-reviewed journals. An occasional use of a book for a literature review is okay, but the majority of your sources should be articles. They should not be websites. They should not be books. So spend some time really looking through what's out there from a literature standpoint and look for good sources. Make sure that your sources, APA standard is that they are newer than 5 years and that they are peer reviewed. So make sure you go through those steps to double check those. I think that's all I have for you guys this week. Oh, last shout out, Tiffany's discussion board. Your classmate Tiffany was the person who had the most replies to her. I chose to do things alphabetically this week, and her last name's a W, so I had to read everybody else's assignment before I got to Tiffany's. So I was really interested in knowing what Tiffany wrote about, which was interesting stuff. So shout out to Tiffany because she was very interesting. I know you guys are trying hard, and I know that this is another course that gets you further along your progression. I hope that you view this feedback as supportive and developmental. If there's ever anything that comes to you in your rubric or through these videos that causes you concern or confusion, or you just don't know what I'm talking about, I don't want you to hesitate to send me an email, and we can set up a time to talk on the phone, or I can answer your question by email. The idea in your graduate journey is not just that you're checking a box and getting through a course, but that you're growing and learning and you're finding better ways to think at a graduate level and to write at a graduate level. So I hope that you're finding this to be helpful. I hope you guys have a great week. I will look forward to hearing from you. Otherwise, I will talk to you guys next week. Take care.